Hey, this is Dustin Draper, and this is my current event video. So a man came into work today, actually, to the Woodbury Corporation offices at University Place, and he was selling some software. And he was talking to us about kind of the new thing that they can do, where if you were to log on to our works Wi-Fi and in the office, that you would be able to access screen time, real-time live recordings, cameras on all of our devices, so on and so forth. So you could essentially see what we're doing on our phones, our computers, everything through this app. So you're able to monitor us. And so that brought us, we said no to that, but that brought me to the Wall Street Journal, and specifically the article that is the ways your boss is spying on you, the new ways your boss is spying on you, by Sarah Krouse. And so, we had a chapter on monitoring and privacy policy, and so I thought this would be a really good, and it was a good and interesting article to read up on. But most of these software companies, they like to keep things really hush-hush, really private on who they're servicing. And I think there is a lot of ethical dilemmas involved in this area because it's pretty new and it's kind of grown rapidly. But anyways, there's a lot of utilitarian arguments that can be offered in the ethics of monitoring employees. There's a lot of things that you can kind of justify because it's for the greater good. And I think there are definitely good things about it, but it definitely has to be used in a balanced and in an appropriate manner. The argument can be made is what is infringing on our privacy rights and what should be made stronger in those privacy rights going forward. The U.S. Constitution doesn't have anything that even mentions our right to privacy. Just a few Supreme Court rulings and some other court rulings have kind of helped us, but they're still controversial and still up in the air. The Constitution's Fourth Amendment protects us against the government's unreasonable search and seizures, but nothing about like our employers, for example. Essentially, when we hire into an employer and we agree to work for them, they have rights as well to monitor on anything that they've paid for, and that includes Wi-Fi, that includes their computers, phones, anything that they give you. They have the right to that information. They own that information that you are using on those paid devices by them. This article is super interesting because it talked about all these different ways. Normally we think of it just being the computer, your emails, so on and so forth. No, it's the Wi-Fi. They're monitoring calls. They transcribe your calls. They have application companies right now monitoring the tone of your voice to see who's maybe a flight risk, so on and so forth. It's insanely detailed these days. We have the Electronic Communication Privacy Act, as it talks about in the book as well, that talks about not having the interception of any communications, but again, that's just if it's in transit, and not necessarily if your employers own something, like I said previously, they can have access to that. So there's the good benefits real quick. McKesson Corp that they're talked about in this article. They looked over 130 million emails, and they respected, what was that called again? Sorry. It was the reciprocal obligation that one of the people talk about in our textbook. And so they knew that, they had to still respect the privacy of their employees because they didn't want to scare them off. They didn't want to shoo them away, but they wanted the analytics. So they were trying to see why certain places of their building would be more successful than others. And they analyzed these emails, and they noticed that those who would communicate up and down the chain of authority, their retention and their success rate was high versus those that would communicate a lot with people outside the company and outside their division. And so they use those analytics of these emails, just who they were communicating to. They didn't look into their emails, their content at all. but they saw such a huge, overwhelming difference that it helped them reconstruct their building. They've moved people. They try to encourage interaction with that chain of command and so on and so forth, and they've seen great success from it. It's a giant corporation. And so, sorry, excuse me, I'm kind of sick too. But anyways, this is their kind of their moral free space. You know, that Mickelson exercise. They knew that their employees have a right. They were very transparent with them. I think that's super important with companies when they're monitoring them, that they are transparent, but at the same time, you don't want to skew your analytics by saying, hey, we are monitoring this. So, you know, employees take it upon themselves to be very careful when they're doing one thing or another. So you have to be very careful with that. You have to respect their property rights. It's probably not right to monitor an employee's personal phone, even though they're on your Wi-Fi. You know, it's highly encouraged. I think this is probably going to change with privacy rights, that you only monitor the things that you own in particular, even devices, even if they are on your Wi-Fi, going forth. And so there's some companies like Turmoil. This is crazy. They give them badges. They've got companies' badges, and they'll track their movement around the office. They'll track their conversation and their tone of voice to see, you know, if they're distressed or if they're a flight risk. And I think that's a little much, personally, and I think that's crossing the line. But it's just kind of crazy, all these different ways that they're trying to track people. Conference calls, conference phones. They can keep an open phone line and hear conversations around the office, and it's perfectly legal. But some people, you know, they say, you know, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right, and you're not building that trust with your employees. But ultimately, your employer controls your livelihood, and if they say, give me this data, it's very hard to say no. Anyways, thank you so much. This is my current event.